The night the millionaire made his daughter choose a mother, the chandeliers burned brighter than the truth. The house smelled of perfume and polished lies, every corner gleaming with the weight of his fortune and his pride. Grace was 14 and already knew that fairy tales lied. The women standing before her weren't queens or angels. They were hunters, their eyes sharp behind their powdered faces, their laughter heavy with strategy. Her father, Henry Whitmore, towered beside her, hand heavy on her shoulder, his grip more command than comfort. "Choose wisely, Grace," he said, his voice a mixture of ice and steel. She wanted to scream that her real mother had only been gone for 2 years, that no diamond-clad stranger could replace her. But Henry's rules didn't bend for grief. He had decided. His daughter would have a new mother, and tonight she would point to one. The 5 women sparkled, all of them white, wealthy, and carefully chosen. They represented status, lineage, and the kind of perfection Henry paraded in business dinners. They smiled with painted lips, but Grace saw the cruelty in their eyes. None of them looked at her as a child who needed love. They looked at her as territory to conquer. Grace's chest tightened. Her hands were cold. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw her. Martha. The housemaid had been with them for years, quiet as shadow, steady as heartbeat. Her skin was the color of deep earth, her hands rough from labor, but her touch always gentle. Martha had braided Grace's hair on nights when grief made her small. Martha had sat outside her bedroom door when the nightmares wouldn't stop. And now, standing at the edge of the room in her faded uniform, she wasn't smiling or pretending. She was simply there, solid and true, like she had always been. Without thinking, Grace stepped forward. Her father's grip tightened. "Grace," he warned, but she pulled away. "I choose her," she said. Silence shattered the room. The 5 women froze, their painted smiles collapsing into shock. Henry blinked, his face pale with fury. And Martha's eyes widened, pain and fear colliding, because she understood what this meant. "You don't know what you're saying," Henry said, his jaw clenched. "That woman is the help. She cleans your shoes. She cannot be your mother." Grace lifted her chin, her voice shaking but clear. "She already is." For the first time in years, Henry was speechless. In the shadows by the staircase, another figure had been watching. Samuel, Henry's 23-year-old son, kept to the dark, his breath caught in his throat. His sister's defiance cracked something inside him, something he had been burying for years. Because Martha wasn't just Grace's anchor. She was his secret. He remembered the nights they lingered too long in the kitchen, his hand brushing hers as she washed the dishes. The quiet confessions when the world outside spat hatred at them, both him for being gay, her for being black in a white household. She listened. She understood. And somehow, impossibly, his heart had found her. But this Grace declaration was fire. And fire could burn everything. Henry recovered quickly. "Enough," he snapped, his voice echoing like a gavel. "Grace, you will not embarrass me in my own home. You will choose from these women, or I will choose for you." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't back down. "No, father, I won't." The tension in the room thickened. The women shifted uncomfortably, muttering under their breath, their painted masks cracking under the weight of rejection. Martha stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Sir," she said softly, her voice respectful but firm, "the child is grieving. Don't make her." "Silence," Henry roared, cutting her off. His face turned red, veins straining against his skin. "You forget your place." Grace flinched. Samuel clenched his fists in the dark. And Martha bowed her head, not out of defeat, but out of survival. But Grace refused to be silenced. She ran to Martha, wrapped her arms around her waist, and whispered, "Don't let him take you away." The room broke into chaos. Henry barked orders at the staff. The women raised their voices in protest. Grace cried into Martha's skirt, and Samuel, finally stepping out of the shadows, spoke. "Father, stop." The room froze again. Samuel never opposed Henry, not openly. His silence had always been his shield. But tonight, something in him shifted. Henry turned, his eyes narrowing. "You, stay out of this." "No," Samuel said, his voice steady though his heart pounded. "She's right. Martha belongs more to this family than any of them." The 5 women gasped, insulted. Henry's fury deepened. "You dare?" "Yes, I dare," Samuel cut in louder now. "Because I'm tired of watching you trade people like their property. Mother loved us. You can't buy that love back with jewels or pedigrees. And you sure as hell can't erase what Martha means to us." Martha's eyes flickered to him, wide, searching. She knew the risk he was taking. Henry stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Be very careful, son." Samuel met his father's gaze, and for the first time he didn't look away. Grace clung tighter to Martha, her tears soaking into the woman's uniform. Martha stroked her hair gently, but her own tears fell silently, hidden from Henry's rage. In that charged silence, the family fracture widened into a canyon. What had been hidden was now standing in the open, fragile but undeniable. And in that moment, everything began to change. The night dissolved into storm. After Samuel's words, the women were dismissed one by one, their heels clattering down the marble halls like the retreat of an army defeated by a child's truth. Their perfume lingered, acrid and sour, a reminder of ambition unmet. Henry remained standing, fists clenched, face hard as granite. "Go to your rooms," he barked, his voice thunder. "Both of you, and you," his eyes cut to Martha. "Pack your things, tonight." Grace cried out, "No, you can't make her leave." She clung tighter to Martha, desperation coursing through her thin frame. Henry's glare was a blade. "I can and I will. This house is mine. My rules are law. You two have forgotten who feeds you, who gives you shelter. You will not shame me with this circus." Martha's lips trembled, but she lifted her chin, meeting Henry's fury with quiet strength. "I've given this family my life. If service is shame, then shame has built your empire, sir." Henry's jaw tightened. The air was thick with danger. Samuel moved between his father and Martha, his voice firm. "You send her away, you lose us both." Henry froze, stunned. "What are you saying?" Samuel's chest heaved. The truth clawed at his throat, the secret he had buried under years of silence. He could almost hear his heartbeat echoing against the gilded walls. And yet, under the weight of his sister's tears and Martha's quiet strength, the secret demanded air. "I love her," Samuel said. The words fell like a gunshot. Grace gasped. Martha's eyes widened, her hands clutching at the fabric of her uniform. And Henry staggered back a step, as though the ground itself betrayed him. His face twisted, disbelief warring with rage. "You, what?" "I love her," Samuel repeated, his voice shaking but steady. "Not like you think, not like possession. I love her because she's the only person who sees me, who accepts me for what I am. I won't live in this house if she's gone." Martha pressed a hand to her mouth. Her heart thundered in her chest, tangled in fear and something deeper, something unspoken. Henry's face turned red, his fury volcanic. "You disgust me," he spat. "First you shame me with your sickness, and now this? A servant? A black woman? Do you want to bury this family name in the gutter?" Samuel's jaw tightened. He had lived under his father's shadow too long. "Your name isn't worth what it costs, father." The silence that followed was unbearable. Grace sobbed softly, her small body trembling against Martha. The storm outside lashed the windows, thunder rolling like judgment. Henry finally turned away, his voice low, trembling with a wrath that promised destruction. "Leave my sight, all of you, before I decide to end this charade permanently." Samuel didn't wait. He reached for his sister, gently prying her from Martha's arms. "Come on, Grace," he whispered. "We'll figure this out." But Grace shook her head fiercely. "I'm not leaving her." Samuel hesitated, then saw the fire in his little sister's eyes, the same fire that had made her choose truth over comfort. He knew she wouldn't bend. So he made the choice for both of them. "Then we all go," Samuel said. Martha's lips parted, her breath catching. "Samuel, you don't know what you're saying. You can't throw your life away for me." He looked at her, and for once, let her see everything he had hidden: longing, defiance, and love stripped bare. "I already did. Years ago." Something broke inside Martha, not in pain, but in release. For so long, she had locked her feelings in silence, afraid of the world's judgment, afraid of Henry's power. But Samuel's eyes, his truth made it impossible to hide any longer. "We'll have nothing," she whispered, fear threading her voice. "We'll have each other," Samuel answered. Grace nodded fiercely, her small hands gripping Martha's. "That's enough." And so, under the weight of thunder and fury, they left the mansion. The world outside was cold, wet with rain that soaked through their clothes as they stumbled into the night. Samuel carried Grace's suitcase, Martha clutching only a small bag with her belongings. They had no plan, no destination, only the certainty that going back was impossible. They found shelter in a small inn on the edge of town, the kind of place Henry Whitmore's fortune had never touched. The room was cramped, the wallpaper peeling, the mattress thin. Yet Grace curled into Martha's lap like she had finally come home, and Samuel sat on the floor, leaning against the bed, his chest heavy with both fear and relief. For the first time, silence wasn't suffocating. It was freedom, but freedom had its price. Within days, whispers spread. The Whitmore scandal made headlines, twisted by journalists hungry for spectacle. "Millionaire's daughter chooses maid-over heiress," the papers sneered. "Whitmore's son disgraces family with forbidden affair." The town buzzed with gossip, half in disbelief, half in condemnation. Everywhere they went, eyes followed them. Doors closed. Jobs vanished before they could ask for them. The world, sharpened by prejudice, turned its back. Martha bore the brunt of it. Strangers spat slurs at her in the street, some muttering about her stealing the family, others about her skin. She kept her head down, but Samuel saw the toll it took, the way her shoulders sagged at night, the tears she hid when she thought he wasn't looking. Grace, though young, refused to bend. "They don't matter," she told Martha fiercely. "You're my mom. No one can take that away." Samuel's heart ached at her bravery. Yet inside, fear gnawed at him. He knew his father's reach. Henry Whitmore wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat. He was power wrapped in cruelty, and he would not rest until control was restored. Came sooner than expected. One evening, as rain streaked the cracked window of their room, the door rattled under heavy knocks. Martha froze, clutching Grace. Samuel stood, heart pounding. When he opened the door, two men in dark suits stood there. They weren't strangers. They were his father's men, eyes cold, movements sharp. "Your father wants you home," one said flatly. Samuel's pulse raced. "We're not going back." The man's lips curled into something cruel. "You don't have a choice." Martha stepped forward, her body instinctively shielding Grace. "Leave us alone," she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. The men exchanged a glance, then smirked. "The help's got courage. Shame it won't last." Samuel's fists clenched. He wanted to fight, but he knew what these men could do. Grace whimpered, her small fingers clutching Martha's arm. And then Martha did something Samuel didn't expect. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, worn at the edges. "You tell Henry this," she said, her voice rising. "He may own half this city, but he doesn't own our souls. If he wants to drag us back, he'll have to do it in front of the whole world. And when he does, they'll see him for what he is." The men hesitated, thrown off by her defiance. They weren't used to servants speaking with fire. After a tense moment, they turned and left, muttering threats under their breath. Samuel shut the door, his hands shaking. He turned to Martha, stunned. "What was that?" She sank into the chair, her shoulders trembling now that the danger had passed. "A gamble," she whispered. "Sometimes the only weapon we have is truth." Grace hugged her tightly. Samuel knelt beside them, his heart swelling with both love and dread. He knew this was only the beginning, because Henry wouldn't stop, and they would have to decide how far they were willing to go to fight him. The weeks that followed tested them like fire. Money dwindled quickly, and Samuel found work hauling crates at the docks. His hands blistered and raw. Martha cleaned houses in neighborhoods where people sneered at her, their tips stingy and laced with insult. Grace stayed close, her laughter dimmed but not extinguished, her resilience astonishing. Through it all, love held them together. In stolen moments, Samuel and Martha found each other's hands, their gazes heavy with longing they dared not voice too loudly. At night, when Grace was asleep, they whispered dreams of a life free from Henry's shadow, of a home built on love instead of fear. But love couldn't erase the danger. One morning, a newspaper headline froze Samuel's blood. Henry Whitmore announces custody battle for daughter, Grace. The article painted Martha as a manipulative maid, Samuel as a degenerate son. It dripped with venom, designed to destroy their credibility. Henry's lawyers were already moving, the court date set. Grace read the headline, her eyes wide with fear. "He's going to take me away, isn't he?" she whispered. Martha pulled her close, kissing her hair. "No, baby. He won't. I won't let him." But Samuel knew the truth. The courts favored men like his father, rich, white, powerful. Against that, their chances were slim, unless they fought not just with law, but with light. And Samuel had an idea. Samuel's idea came to him in the silence of the dockyard. The morning mist hung low, his muscles aching from the day's labor, the salt air burning his lungs. He thought about the headlines, about Henry's wealth painting them as villains, and realized they were fighting on his father's battlefield. Law, money, influence, Henry would always win there. But the truth that was theirs. And if the world could see it, if they could hear Grace, if they could feel Martha's love, then maybe, just maybe, people would stop seeing them as pawns in Henry's game and start seeing them as a family. That night, Samuel told them his plan. They would go public. Not with the newspapers Henry controlled, not with lawyers who twisted words, but with their own voices. "We tell everything," he said, eyes burning with determination. "Not just what happened in that house, but who we are. We let people see us." Martha frowned, her hands clasped in her lap. "The world isn't kind to people like us, Samuel. You know that better than anyone. They'll call me names worse than they already do. They'll call you." Her voice broke, unwilling to say the word. Samuel reached for her hand. "Steady. They already call me that. They already spit when we walk by. But hiding hasn't protected us. Has it? It's time we stop running." Grace, sitting between them, looked up with wide eyes. "If it means they'll leave us alone, I'll tell them everything. I don't care what they say. You're my mom, Martha, and you're my brother, Samuel. No one gets to take that away." Martha's heart ached at the child's courage. She stroked Grace's hair, torn between fear and pride. "You shouldn't have to be this brave, baby." "But I am," Grace said, fierce as fire. And so they made the choice. Samuel found an old friend from college, Daniel, who now worked as a producer for a small but respected online news channel. Daniel had always been kind, one of the few who hadn't turned away when Samuel came out. He listened carefully as Samuel explained, then nodded. "We'll record everything. Live if you want. But you need to understand, once this is out, there's no going back. The whole country will see it. And your father, he won't hold back either." "We're ready," Samuel said. Martha wasn't sure they were. But when the day came, she sat beside Samuel and Grace in front of the camera, her hands trembling in her lap. The studio lights were hot, the silence thick before the red light blinked on. Grace went first. She spoke in a small but steady voice about her mother, about the loneliness that came after her death, about the night her father forced her to choose. She told the world how she looked at the 5 glittering women and felt nothing. But when she saw Martha, she felt safe, loved, seen. "She doesn't have diamonds," Grace said softly, "but she has everything I need. She listens to me. She holds me when I cry. She doesn't pretend." Martha's eyes blurred with tears. Then Samuel spoke. He told the truth Henry had spent years burying. About growing up under the weight of his father's expectations, about the fear of being discovered, about the cruelty he endured for simply being himself. He didn't shy from the word his father hurled like poison gay. He claimed it with pride, his voice steady. And then, with the whole country watching, he spoke of Martha. She is not a servant. She is not a scandal. She is the heart of this family. She held me together when the world wanted me broken. And I love her. Not in shame, not in secrecy, but in truth. If that makes me less of a Whitmore, then so be it. I'd rather be nothing with her than everything without her. The studio was silent when he finished. Martha's hands shook, but when Daniel asked if she wanted to say something, she surprised herself. She spoke of her childhood in the South, of growing up poor, of being told every day that her skin meant she was less. She spoke of working for families who looked through her, never at her, until she met Grace, a child who looked at her like she was the sun. She spoke of Samuel, how he had sat in her kitchen at night, broken by a father who couldn't love him, and how she had seen in him the same loneliness she carried. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. People will say this isn't right. They'll say we don't belong together. But family isn't built on what people say. Family is built on love. And if that means standing against the world, then I will. The broadcast went live that night, and by morning the world had erupted. The response was a storm. Some praised them, calling Grace brave, Samuel inspiring, Martha a symbol of resilience. Hashtags trended. Supporters marched outside the Whitmore estate with signs that read love is stronger than money and family is chosen. But hate came just as fierce. Anonymous threats flooded Samuel's phone. Martha's past was dragged through the mud, every mistake magnified. Some shouted that Samuel was perverse, that Martha was a manipulator, that Grace had been brainwashed. The vitriol was endless. Henry, true to form, struck back hard. He called a press conference, standing before flashing cameras in his tailored suit, voice smooth with practiced charm. He painted Samuel as unstable, Martha as predatory, Grace as a child confused by grief. He vowed to rescue his daughter from what he called a dangerous situation. The custody trial loomed closer. Courtrooms are supposed to be places of justice, but when Samuel and Martha walked into the grand chamber, it felt like stepping into a lion's den. Henry sat at the front with his lawyers, calm and confident, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. Grace held Martha's hand tightly. Samuel sat beside them, his heart pounding. Their lawyer, a kind woman named Elaine who had volunteered after watching their broadcast, whispered encouragement. Remember, the truth is your power. Just tell it. The trial was brutal. Henry's lawyers attacked relentlessly, painting Samuel as unstable, citing his sexuality as evidence of poor judgment. They smeared Martha, questioning her character, her background, her relationship with Samuel. The insinuations were cruel, racist, dripping with contempt. But then Grace took the stand. She spoke with a clarity that silenced the room. My father thinks money makes a family. It doesn't. Love does. Martha loves me. Samuel loves me. That's more than my father ever gave. Her words cracked Henry's mask. For the first time, he flinched. Martha testified next, her voice trembling but unbroken. She told the court what Grace meant to her, how she never sought to replace her mother but only to protect her. When Henry's lawyer sneered, "Do you expect this court to believe you care for this child more than her own father?" Martha looked at Henry directly and said, "I don't expect it. I know it." Samuel spoke last. He didn't hide his pain or his truth. He spoke of his father's cruelty, of the years he spent trying to earn love that never came, of the nights he thought of ending it all. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "If you give her back to him," he said, nodding at Grace, "you'll be condemning her to the same emptiness I grew up with. Don't let money blind you to love." The courtroom was hushed when he finished. Even the judge seemed shaken. The verdict was delayed. Days passed in anxious silence. The three of them stayed in their small room, waiting, hearts heavy with both fear and hope. On the day of judgment, they walked into court hand in hand. Henry was there, calm as ever, confident in his money, his influence. But as the judge read the decision, his face changed. Grace would remain with Martha. Custody was granted not to wealth, but to love. The courtroom erupted. Grace cried out in joy, leaping into Martha's arms. Samuel covered his face, tears streaming unchecked. Martha held them both, her body trembling with relief. Henry stood frozen, disbelief etched into every line of his face. For once, his power had failed him. But as they left the courthouse surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras, Samuel knew this wasn't the end. His father would never truly let go. The war wasn't over. Yet for the first time they had won a battle. That night they returned to their small inn. The air smelled of rain, fresh and clean, as though the world itself had shifted. Grace danced around the room, laughing, her joy uncontainable. Martha sat on the bed, exhausted but radiant, tears slipping down her cheeks as she watched the girl. Samuel stood by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. Martha joined him, her hand finding his. "We did it," she whispered. He turned to her, his eyes soft. "No, you did it. You saved her. You saved us." Martha shook her head. "We saved each other." For a moment, silence held them, warm and tender. Then Samuel leaned closer, his forehead brushing hers, his voice low. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Martha closed her eyes, letting herself believe it. For the first time in her life, hope didn't feel like a lie. For a few weeks, life almost felt normal. Grace went back to school. Samuel picked up more shifts at the dock, his hands rough but his heart lighter. Martha found steady work with a local community center that welcomed her with kindness instead of suspicion. They ate together each night at the small kitchen table in their rented apartment, laughing over simple meals. For the first time, they felt like a real family. But shadows never stayed gone. Henry Whitmore, humiliated in court, struck back with a fury sharpened by loss. He withdrew support from charities that had spoken in their favor, pressured businesses to deny Samuel work, and unleashed smear campaigns against Martha. Tabloids plastered her face with headlines calling her the maid who destroyed a dynasty. Samuel's sexuality became fodder for cruel jokes on late-night television. And strangers shouted in the street, their voices filled with venom. The worst came one evening as Grace left school. A group of boys cornered her, mocking her, calling her slurs she didn't yet understand but felt like knives. She came home with a torn backpack and tear-streaked cheeks. Martha held her close, rage boiling in her chest. Samuel's fists trembled, aching to strike back at a world that refused to let them live in peace. "This is what he wanted," Samuel said bitterly that night. "He couldn't win in court, so he'll ruin us piece by piece." Martha looked at him, her eyes fierce despite her exhaustion. "Then we don't let him. We show him he can't take away what he doesn't own." "What if he never stops?" Samuel asked. "Then neither do we," Martha answered. The chance came in the form of an invitation. A prominent civil rights organization reached out after seeing their story. They wanted Samuel and Martha to speak at a national conference about family, race, and love. It was a risk standing before thousands, making their lives even more public, but it was also an opportunity. "We can't hide anymore," Samuel said. "If we're going to survive this, we have to be bigger than him." Martha hesitated. The thought of standing before cameras again terrified her. But when she saw Grace, sitting at the table drawing a picture of the three of them holding hands, she knew the answer. They agreed. The night of the conference, the hall was packed. The stage lights were blinding, the hum of the crowd overwhelming. Martha's knees trembled, but Samuel squeezed her hand, steady and strong. Grace sat in the front row with Elaine, their lawyer, her small face glowing with pride. Samuel spoke first. He talked about love, about truth, about the courage it took to step into the light. His words were steady, his presence commanding. He spoke not only for himself but for every person who had ever been silenced by shame or fear. Then Martha stepped up to the podium. Her hands shook, but her voice grew stronger with each word. She spoke about race, about being invisible, about the way society dismissed her worth. She spoke about finding family in the most unexpected places, about choosing love over bitterness. "I am not ashamed of who I am," she said, her voice ringing clear. "I am not ashamed of who I love, and I will not let anyone tell my daughter she should be ashamed of who she calls her mother." The hall erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, cheering, some with tears streaming down their faces. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled furiously. And in that moment, Martha felt the weight of Henry's shadow begin to lift. But Henry wasn't done. That night, as they left the hall, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Henry stepped out, immaculate as ever, his face a mask of cold fury. The crowd hushed, watching as he strode toward them. Security hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. He stopped in front of Samuel, his eyes burning. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "This spectacle, these speeches, they won't save you. You've disgraced me for the last time." Samuel stood his ground. "I don't need to save myself, Father. I just need to live. Something you've never understood." Henry's gaze shifted to Martha. His voice dripped venom. "You think you belong in my world? You never will. You're nothing but enough." The word came from Grace. Her small voice cut through the tension like a bell. She stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists, her eyes blazing. "Stop talking about her like that. She's my mom. And you're not my dad anymore. Dads don't hurt people like this." The crowd gasped. Henry's face went pale, his lips trembling as though the child's words pierced deeper than any court ruling. For the first time, Henry Whitmore looked small. Martha pulled Grace close, tears in her eyes. Samuel's chest swelled with pride and sorrow. Henry opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The crowd murmured, phones raised, cameras rolling. His image, the powerful, untouchable millionaire, was crumbling in real time. He turned, rage twisting his features, and fled into his car. The door slammed, and the vehicle sped away into the night. They never saw him again. Months passed. The storm quieted. Without Henry's constant attacks, the world slowly shifted its gaze. The headlines faded, replaced by newer scandals. Some people still whispered when they walked by, but others smiled, nodded, even offered kind words. The community that once shunned them began to embrace them. Samuel found steadier work, writing articles about identity and resilience. Martha became a counselor at the community center, guiding young girls who faced the same struggles she had. Grace thrived in school, her laughter bright again, her drawings filling the apartment walls with color. They weren't rich, they weren't powerful, but they were free. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they sat together on the small balcony of their apartment. Grace was sprawled on the floor, coloring. Martha leaned against Samuel, her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about him?" Samuel asked quietly. Martha sighed. "Sometimes, but not the way I used to. He doesn't own space in my heart anymore." Samuel nodded, his eyes soft. "I think I finally understand something. Family isn't who you're born to. It's who stands beside you when the world turns against you." Martha smiled, her fingers lacing with his. "Then we're family. Always." Grace looked up from her drawing, grinning. "Forever." They laughed, the sound light and unbroken. The future was uncertain, the world still flawed and cruel in places. But in that moment, surrounded by love, they knew they had already won the only battle that mattered. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the evening air, was the quiet promise of hope, the kind that doesn't end. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.